The night Liam Carter saved a stranger's life on Brooklyn Bridge, he had no idea she was billionaire heiress Aurora Whitmore, or that pulling her from the edge would ignite a forbidden love that would destroy everything they thought they knew about sacrifice, passion, and second chances. Welcome to tonight's story. Stay with me until the very end, and please comment with your city so I can see how far this tale of love and redemption has traveled across the world. The rain hammered Brooklyn Bridge like bullets against steel, each drop exploding into 1,000 fragments that caught the amber glow of streetlights. It was past midnight on a Tuesday in October, and the city that never sleeps had finally dozed off, leaving only the occasional taxi to cut through the darkness with its headlights slicing the storm. Liam Carter pulled his jacket tighter around his sleeping daughter Emma, her small body curled against his chest in the baby carrier. At 4 years old, she was getting too big for this. But tonight had been one of those nights, the kind where the walls of their cramped apartment felt like they were closing in, where the silence screamed louder than any noise, where the ghost of his wife Sarah seemed to whisper from every corner. Just a walk, he'd told himself, stepping into the storm. Just until she stops crying. But Emma had been asleep for 20 minutes now, and still Liam found himself walking, his boots echoing against the wet pavement of the bridge's pedestrian walkway. The rain had soaked through his jacket, through his shirt, straight to his bones, but he didn't care. Out here in the fury of the storm, he could finally breathe. That's when he saw her. At first, she was just a shadow against the railing, a dark silhouette that might have been a trick of the light. But as he drew closer, his blood turned to ice. A woman stood on the wrong side of the safety barrier, her bare feet balanced on the narrow ledge, her long dark hair whipping in the wind like a war flag. She wore a white dress that clung to her body like a second skin made translucent by the rain. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. Emma stirred in her sleep, and he instinctively placed a protective hand over her back. "Miss!" he called out, his voice nearly swallowed by the storm. "Miss, don't!" The woman didn't turn. She seemed to be staring down at the black water below, where the East River churned like a living thing, hungry and patient. Liam moved closer, each step calculated, deliberate. He'd learned something about crisis during the 18 months since Sarah's death, how to move when everything inside you was screaming, how to function when your world had already ended. "My name's Liam," he said, raising his voice just enough to cut through the wind. "What's yours?" This time she turned. Even in the dim light, even with her hair plastered to her face, she was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. But her eyes, God, her eyes looked like windows into a house where no one lived anymore. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice carrying a cultured accent that spoke of private schools and charity galas. "Nothing matters." "That's not true." Liam took another step forward. Emma shifted in her sleep, making a small sound that could have been contentment or distress. "I've got a little girl here who matters. Her name's Emma." The woman's gaze dropped to the baby carrier, and for just a moment something flickered across her features, surprise maybe, or recognition of something she'd forgotten existed. "She's beautiful," the woman whispered. "She is," Liam agreed. "And she's the reason I'm still here. She's the reason I get up every morning even when I don't want to, even when everything feels impossible." The woman's grip on the railing tightened. Her knuckles were white against the dark metal. "You don't understand," she said. I can't be what everyone wants me to be anymore. I can't be perfect, can't be obedient, can't be." She took a shuddering breath. "I can't be owned." The word hit Liam like a physical blow. Owned. He thought of Sarah, how she'd fought so hard to live, how she'd clawed for every breath in those final weeks, while the cancer ate her alive from the inside. This woman, this beautiful, broken woman, wanted to throw away what Sarah would have killed to keep. "Listen to me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know about feeling trapped. I know about wanting to disappear. My wife died a year and a half ago, and there were nights I stood in Emma's room watching her sleep and wondered if she'd be better off without me. If maybe the world would be kinder to her if I just wasn't." The woman turned to face him fully now, water streaming down her face, rain or tears, he couldn't tell. "But then morning would come," Liam continued, "and she'd wake up and smile at me like I was her whole world. And I realized that maybe I wasn't living for me anymore. Maybe I was living for her, and maybe that was enough." "It's not the same," the woman said, but her voice had lost some of its finality. "You don't know what it's like to have every choice made for you, every word scripted, every breath monitored." "You're right," Liam admitted. "I don't. But I know what it's like to lose someone you love. And whatever's happened to you, whatever's been done to you, someone somewhere would rather have you broken than gone forever." The wind picked up, howling between the bridge's cables like a living thing. The woman swayed slightly, and Liam's heart stopped. "What's your name?" he asked again, urgency creeping into his voice. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible over the storm, "Aurora." "Aurora," he repeated, tasting the name. "Like the Northern Lights?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My mother named me that. She said I was born during a storm, just like tonight, and when I took my first breath, the rain stopped, and the sky lit up with colors." "Where is she now, your mother?" The smile died. "Gone, like everything else that was ever real." Liam could see her wavering not just physically, but emotionally. The fight was going out of her, and that terrified him more than her standing on the ledge. "Aurora," he said, his voice strong and clear. "Look at me." She did. "I don't know what brought you here tonight, but I know this, you're not alone. Not anymore. I'm here, Emma's here, and we're not going anywhere. You don't even know me. So tell me," he said simply. "Tell me who Aurora is when no one's watching." The question seemed to catch her off guard. She stared at him for a long moment, and Liam could see something working behind her eyes, some internal battle being fought and won. She started, then stopped. "I used to paint, before everything got complicated. I used to sneak up to the roof of our building and paint the sunrise." "What did you paint?" "Freedom," she whispered. "I painted freedom." The word hung between them like a bridge of its own, spanning the gap between her despair and his hope. "You can paint it again," Liam said. "You can paint anything you want, but you have to come down first." Aurora looked down at the water again, then back at him. "What if I can't? What if I'm too broken?" "Then you learn to live broken," he said without hesitation. "I'm broken too. Emma's broken. She lost her mother before she was old enough to understand what that meant. But we're broken together, and somehow that makes us whole." Emma stirred again, this time opening her eyes. She looked around with the confused expression of a child waking in an unfamiliar place, then focused on Aurora. Instead of crying or hiding, she smiled. "Pretty lady," Emma said in her small, clear voice. Aurora's face crumpled. She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and Liam knew he had her. "Come down, Aurora," he said gently. "Come down and meet Emma properly." For a moment, time suspended itself. The rain continued to fall, the wind continued to howl, but everything else went still. Aurora stood balanced between two worlds, the one that had brought her to this bridge, and the one that might exist if she chose to step away from the edge. Then slowly, carefully, she began to climb back over the railing. Liam moved the moment she was within reach, grabbing her arm to steady her as she swung her leg over the barrier. The moment her feet touched solid ground, her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if he hadn't caught her. They stood there in the rain, Aurora shaking in his arms, while Emma watched with wide, curious eyes. Liam could feel Aurora's heartbeat against his chest, rapid and wild like a caged bird finally tasting air. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you." Aurora pulled back to look at him, and for the first time since he'd seen her, there was something alive in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you stop?" Liam thought about it, really thought about it. He could have said it was the right thing to do, could have given her some noble reason about the sanctity of life or the inherent worth of every human being. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. "Because," he said finally, "sometimes we all need someone to tell us we're worth saving." They took shelter in an all-night diner 6 blocks from the bridge, a place that smelled like coffee and grease and the kind of hope that only exists at 3 a.m. Emma had fallen back asleep in Liam's arms, but Aurora sat across from him wrapped in his jacket, holding a cup of hot chocolate, like it was a lifeline. "Tell me about her," Aurora said, nodding toward Emma. "Your daughter." Liam looked down at Emma's peaceful face and felt that familiar stab of love mixed with terror that came with being solely responsible for another human being. "She's everything I never knew I needed," he said. "Smart as hell, stubborn as her mother, and completely fearless in ways that give me heart attacks on a daily basis." "And her mother," Aurora's voice was careful, gentle. "Sarah." The name still hurt to say, even after all this time. She was a teacher, 3rd grade. She had this way of making every kid in her class feel like they were the most important person in the world. He paused, lost in memory. "She was diagnosed with breast cancer when Emma was 2. We fought it for 8 months, but—" "I'm sorry," Aurora said, and he could hear in her voice that she meant it. "She made me promise—" Liam continued, needing to say it, needing her to understand. "In those last weeks, when we both knew how it was going to end, she made me promise I'd take care of Emma, that I'd love her enough for both of us. And you have." "I've tried." He looked up at Aurora, really seeing her for the first time in the diner's fluorescent lights. Even disheveled, even broken, she was striking in a way that made his artist's eye ache. "What about you? What brought you to that bridge tonight?" Aurora's hands tightened around her cup. "My father," she said simply, as if those 2 words explained everything. When she didn't continue, Liam waited. He'd learned patience in the months after Sarah's death, learned that sometimes the most important things took time to surface. "Richard Whitmore," Aurora said finally, and Liam's blood went cold. Everyone in New York knew that name, billionaire real estate mogul kingmaker, the kind of man who bought politicians like other people bought coffee. "You're Aurora Whitmore," he said, understanding flooding through him. She nodded miserably. "The disappointment daughter. The one who can't seem to follow orders or marry the right man or smile pretty enough for the cameras. The heiress who gives millions to charity," Liam countered, remembering newspaper headlines. "The one who funds art programs in public schools." "My father's money," Aurora said bitterly. "Carefully calculated donations designed to make the family look good. I'm not allowed to give away anything that matters." "What would you give away if you could—" The question seemed to surprise her. "Everything," she said without hesitation. "All of it." The money, the houses, the expectations. I'd give it all away for one day of actually belonging to myself. Liam studied her face, seeing past the privilege to the pain underneath. Is that why you were on the bridge, because you feel like you don't belong to yourself? Aurora was quiet for a long moment, staring into her hot chocolate, like it held answers. 3 days ago, she said finally, my father informed me that I'm getting married. Not that I was engaged, not that someone had proposed, that I was getting married. To Bradley Ashworth, Senator's son, family friend, completely devoted to my father's political ambitions. And you don't love him. I don't even like him, Aurora said with a bitter laugh. But that doesn't matter. What I want doesn't matter. It never has. Liam felt something hot and protective surge in his chest. So you decided to take control the only way you knew how. I've been thinking about it for months, Aurora admitted. The bridge, I mean. It's visible from my bedroom window, and some nights I'd stand there and imagine what it would feel like to just and let go. But you didn't. No, she said, looking at Emma's sleeping form. I didn't. The diner was nearly empty, except for a lone waitress reading a paperback novel and a trucker working his way through a plate of eggs. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, the rain settling into a steady drizzle. What happens now? Aurora asked. It was a good question. In a few hours, the sun would rise on a world that expected Aurora Whitmore to return to her gilded cage, to smile and nod and marry the man her father had chosen. And Liam would go back to his job at the construction site, to the endless cycle of work and worry that defined his days. But sitting here in this diner with Emma sleeping between them and Aurora's eyes holding something that might have been hope, Liam felt like maybe the world could be different than it was yesterday. I don't know, he said honestly, but I know you're not going back to that bridge. How can you be so sure? Liam reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Her skin was cold but warming. Because, he said, you told me you used to paint freedom, and you can't paint if you're not here to hold the brush. Aurora's eyes filled with tears, but this time they seemed different, cleaner somehow, like rain washing away dust. I don't even know you, she whispered. You know enough, Liam said. You know I'm a single dad who talks to strangers on bridges. You know I make promises I'm not sure I can keep. You know I think my daughter is the most important thing in the universe. And what do you know about me? Liam considered this seriously. I know you're brave enough to stand on a ledge in a storm. I know you're strong enough to climb back down. I know you care more about freedom than money, and that makes you richer than your father will ever be. Aurora laughed, a real laugh that transformed her entire face. You're either very wise or completely insane. Probably both, Liam admitted. Emma stirred in his arms, making the small sounds that meant she was waking up. A moment later, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Aurora. Are you sad? Emma asked, with the devastating directness of childhood. Aurora's breath caught. A little bit, sweetheart. Daddy gets sad sometimes too, Emma said matter-of-factly, when he looks at Mommy's pictures. But then I give him hugs, and he feels better. Without hesitation, Emma climbed out of Liam's lap and onto the bench beside Aurora, wrapping her small arms around the woman's waist. There, Emma said, settling back with satisfaction. Now you feel better too. Aurora looked like she might break apart completely. She gathered Emma against her, burying her face in the little girl's hair, and Liam watched something fundamental shift in her expression. Thank you, Aurora whispered to Emma. That's the best hug I've had in a very long time. Oh. Daddy gives good hugs too, Emma informed her. Want me to tell him to hug you? Aurora looked at Liam over Emma's head, and he saw vulnerability there that made his chest tight. Only if he wants to, Aurora said softly. Liam didn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he slid around to their side of the booth and wrapped his arms around both of them, pulling them close. Aurora felt fragile against him, like something precious that had been dropped and cracked, but not quite broken. They sat like that as the storm continued to fade outside, three people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen against all odds to hold on. I have to go back, Aurora said eventually, but she didn't pull away. If I don't show up by morning, my father will send people looking for me. And then what? Liam asked. And then I pretend last night never happened. I smile and nod and plan a wedding I don't want to a man I don't love. Or, Liam said carefully, you don't. Aurora pulled back to look at him. What do you mean? I mean you have choices, Aurora. Maybe not easy ones, maybe not ones without consequences, but you have them. You don't understand what my father is capable of. Then help me understand, Liam interrupted. Help me understand how a grown woman with her own money and her own life can be forced into anything. Aurora was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently stroking Emma's hair. Because it's not just my life, she said finally. My father owns half the construction companies in the city. He has political connections that go all the way to Washington. Cross him, and suddenly you can't get work, can't get loans, can't get help from anyone who matters. The implication hit Liam like a punch to the gut. You're protecting me. I'm protecting everyone I might care about, Aurora said. It's easier to alone. Except you're not alone anymore, Emma piped up, having followed the conversation with the uncanny comprehension of children. You have us now. Aurora's eyes filled again. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Yes, it is, Emma said with 4-year-old certainty. Daddy says family isn't just people who are born together. It's people who choose to stay together. Liam felt his heart stop. He'd said those exact words to Emma just last week, trying to explain why some of her friends had different kinds of families than theirs. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured. Aurora looked between them, something working in her expression that Liam couldn't quite read. What if I choose wrong? She asked. What if I'm not strong enough? Then we'll figure it out together, Liam said, without hesitation. That's what family does. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to creep across the horizon, painting the sky in soft pastels that reminded Liam of Aurora's name. Aurora stood up slowly, gently disentangling herself from Emma's sleepy embrace. I have to go, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Not yet, Emma said, tugging on Aurora's hand. Stay for breakfast. Daddy makes really good pancakes. We don't have pancake stuff at home, baby, Liam said gently. We could get some, Emma said with the logic of childhood. Aurora could help us shop, and then we could all make breakfast together. Liam looked at Aurora, seeing the war playing out across her features, duty against desire, fear against hope. It's your choice, he said quietly. It's always your choice. Aurora closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, something had changed. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all night. Let's make pancakes. The grocery store at 6 a.m. was a strange liminal place populated by night shift workers heading home and early risers starting their day. Aurora pushed the cart while Emma rode in the front, chattering about the proper pancake-to-syrup ratio and whether chocolate chips constituted a vegetable if they came from cocoa beans. Liam watched Aurora navigate the fluorescent-lit aisles with a kind of wonder, as if she'd never seen a place where normal people bought normal things, which he realized she probably hadn't. "Have you ever been grocery shopping before?" he asked, as she stared in fascination at the vast array of cereal options. "Not like this," Aurora admitted. "We have people who handle that sort of thing." "People," Liam repeated, trying to imagine a life where grocery shopping was something that happened to you rather than something you did. "It sounds ridiculous when you say it like that," Aurora said with a self-deprecating smile. "Not ridiculous," Liam corrected. "Just different." Emma had discovered the bakery section and was pressing her face against the glass display case, leaving small nose prints on the surface. "Look," she called out. "They have cookies that look like flowers." Aurora crouched down beside her, studying the decorated sugar cookies with an artist's eye. "They're beautiful," she said, "but I bet we could make even prettier ones at home." "Really?" Emma's eyes went wide with possibility. "Really?" Aurora confirmed. "With lots of colors and maybe some sprinkles." Liam felt something shift in his chest as he watched them together. Aurora spoke to Emma like she was a person worth listening to, not just a child to be managed or dismissed. It was the same way Sarah used to talk to her students, and the recognition was both painful and hopeful. They loaded the cart with pancake ingredients and cookie supplies, and Aurora insisted on adding fresh flowers from the floral department, sunflowers and daisies that she said would make the apartment feel more alive. At the checkout, Liam reached for his wallet, but Aurora was faster. "Let me," she said, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. "Please, let me contribute something real." The total came to $73, and change probably less than Aurora spent on a single lunch in her normal life, but Liam could see it meant something more to her than money. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. Aurora's smile was radiant. "Thank you for letting me." Back at Liam's apartment, Aurora looked around with the same wonder she'd shown in the grocery store. The place was small, a one-bedroom, that he'd converted into a makeshift two-bedroom by hanging curtains around Emma's corner, but it was clean and warm and filled with evidence of their life together. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator and most of one wall. Photos of Sarah smiled down from bookshelves and end tables. Plants that Sarah had loved and Liam had somehow managed to keep alive sat in every available window. "It's perfect," Aurora said softly, running her fingers along the spine of a children's book left open on the couch. "It's small," Liam said, suddenly self-conscious. "No," Aurora said firmly. "It's home. I can feel it." Emma had already pulled out her step stool and was assembling ingredients on the counter with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. "Can Aurora help crack the eggs?" Emma asked. "She has good hands for it." Aurora looked at her hand as if seeing them for the first time. "I've never actually cracked an egg before." "Never." Emma's voice held the amazement reserved for particularly fascinating facts. "Never," Aurora confirmed. "We have had people for that too." "Daddy will teach you," Emma said with confidence. "He's a really good teacher." And so Liam found himself standing behind Aurora at the kitchen counter, his hands covering hers as they cracked eggs into a bowl. She was warm against him, and he could smell her shampoo, something expensive and complex that spoke of a world he'd never been part of. "Like this," he murmured, guiding her movements. "You want to crack it sharp and clean, then pull apart with your thumbs." Aurora's first attempt was too tentative, and the egg broke unevenly, dropping pieces of shell into the bowl. "That's okay," Liam said, fishing out the shell fragments. "Try again." Her second attempt was perfect, the egg sliding smoothly into the bowl without a trace of shell. "I did it," Aurora said, her voice filled with the kind of joy most people reserved for major accomplishments. You did. Liam agreed and found himself reluctant to step away from her. Emma clapped her hands in approval. Now you're a real cook. They worked together to make the pancakes, Aurora learning to flip them without breaking them, while Emma narrated every step of the process. The kitchen filled with the smell of vanilla and butter, and Liam thought this might be what contentment felt like, simple, warm, unexpected. When they finally sat down to eat, the sun was fully up, streaming through the windows and painting everything in gold. Aurora had arranged the flowers in a mason jar centerpiece, and Emma had drawn pictures on napkins to use as placemats. "This is the best breakfast I've ever had," Aurora said, and Liam could tell she meant it. "Even though the pancakes are a little burnt?" Emma asked. "Especially because they're a little burnt," Aurora said seriously. "It means we made them ourselves." They were finishing their second helpings when Aurora's phone buzzed on the counter. The sound cut through their contentment like a knife, and Liam watched Aurora's face change as she read the message. "What is it?" he asked. "My father," Aurora said, her voice flat. "He's looking for me." She showed him the screen, a series of increasingly urgent texts from someone listed only as Richard. "Where are you?" "The car is waiting." "Aurora, this is not the time for your dramatics. Answer your phone. I'm sending security." "How long do we have?" Liam asked. Aurora was already standing, the joy draining from her face like water from a broken cup. "Not long," she said. "He has people who can track my phone, my credit cards. If he's already sent security—" As if summoned by her words, there was a sharp knock at the door. Emma looked between them with wide eyes. "Who's that?" Aurora's face had gone pale. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Liam. "I'm so sorry. I should never have come here. I should never have put you and Emma at risk." The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "It's okay," Liam said, though his heart was hammering. "We'll figure this out." "Mr. Carter?" a voice called through the door. "We're here for Miss Whitmore." Aurora closed her eyes. "I have to go." "No," Emma said suddenly, her small voice cutting through the tension. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Daddy taught me that." Aurora knelt down to Emma's level, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "Sometimes grown-ups have to do things they don't want to do," Aurora said gently. "But that doesn't mean we stop caring about the people who matter to us." "Do we matter to you?" Emma asked with devastating directness. Aurora's composure finally cracked completely. She pulled Emma into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "More than anything," she whispered. "More than you'll ever know." The knocking had stopped, but Liam could hear voices in the hallway, men discussing strategy, figuring out their next move. "There's a fire escape," Liam said quietly. "In the bedroom, if you want another choice." Aurora looked at him over Emma's head, and he could see her weighing options, calculating risks. "If I run," she said, "they'll come after you. My father doesn't forgive people who help me defy him." "Let me worry about that," Liam said. "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," Liam interrupted. "I'm offering." Aurora stood slowly still, holding Emma's hand. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk everything for someone you just met?" Liam thought about Sarah, about promises made in hospital rooms, and vows spoken in the shadow of death. He thought about Emma, about the kind of world he wanted her to grow up in, one where people helped each other, where love mattered more than money, where no one had to face their battles alone. "Because," he said simply, "someone needs to." The voices in the hallway were getting closer. Aurora looked at the door, then at the bedroom, then at Emma's hopeful face. "The fire escape," she said finally. "Show me the fire escape." But as they moved toward the bedroom, there was another sound footsteps on the fire escape itself. Aurora's father's people had covered all the exits. They were trapped. Aurora sank onto the couch, defeat written across her features. "It's over," she said. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Emma climbed onto the couch beside her, taking Aurora's hand with the fearless compassion of childhood. "It's not over," Emma said firmly. "Daddy says nothing's ever really over until you decide it is." The knocking returned, accompanied by a voice Liam didn't recognize. "Miss Whitmore, your father is waiting. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Aurora stood up, squaring her shoulders. But before she could move toward the door, Liam caught her hand. "Wait," he said. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw fear and resignation, and something else, something that looked like love, impossible and fragile and real. "Whatever happens next," Liam said, "remember this morning. Remember the pancakes and the flowers and the way Emma laughed when you got flour in your hair. Remember that for a few hours you belong to yourself." Aurora's smile was tremulous but genuine. "I'll remember everything." And then before he could stop her, before he could find words for everything he was feeling, she stood on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and desperate and tasted like syrup and possibility. It was a beginning and an ending and a promise all wrapped into one impossible moment. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright with tears and something that might have been hope. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." Then she walked to the door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the hallway, where her father's men were waiting. Liam heard voices, authoritative and polite, but implacable. He heard Aurora's responses, calm and dignified even in surrender. And then he heard nothing but the sound of footsteps fading down the hallway, carrying Aurora back to a world that would never understand what they'd found in a diner at 3 a.m. Emma came to stand beside him at the window, watching as a black car pulled away from the curb 6 floors below. "Is Aurora going to be okay?" Emma asked. Liam put his arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "I don't know, baby," he said honestly. "But I think she's stronger than she knows. Will we see her again?" That was the question that was breaking his heart, the one he couldn't answer. "I hope so," he said finally. "I really hope so." They stood at the window long after the car had disappeared, watching the city wake up around them. The morning that had started with such promise now felt hollow, incomplete. But the flowers Aurora had chosen still sat in their mason jar on the kitchen table, and Emma's napkin drawings still decorated their placemats, and somewhere in the apartment there was still the faint scent of expensive shampoo and vanilla pancakes. Evidence that it had been real. Evidence that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, people found each other. Evidence that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, between the most unlikely people, in the space of a single storm-swept night. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a future on. Even if neither of them knew yet what that future might look like. The silence that followed Aurora's departure felt like a living thing, heavy and oppressive, settling into every corner of the apartment like dust after an explosion. Liam stood at the window for nearly an hour, Emma curled against his side, both of them watching the street below as if Aurora might somehow materialize from the morning crowd. But she didn't come back, and eventually real life began to reassert itself with the cruel persistence of time. Emma needed to get ready for preschool. Liam needed to shower and change for work. The dishes from their perfect breakfast sat abandoned on the table syrup, congealing into amber pools that caught the morning light. "Daddy." Emma's voice was small, uncertain. "Are you sad?" Liam looked down at his daughter, at her worried brown eyes that were so much like Sarah's, and realized he didn't have words for what he was feeling. Sad felt too simple for the complex knot of emotions lodged in his chest, loss and hope and fear, and something that might have been love all tangled together, until he couldn't tell where one feeling ended and another began. "A little bit baby," he said finally, because honesty had always been his policy with Emma, even when the truth was complicated. "Because Aurora had to go away." "Yeah, because Aurora had to go away." Emma considered this with the serious concentration she applied to all of life's major mysteries. "But she'll come back," Emma said with 4-year-old certainty. "People who love each other always come back." The words hit Liam like a physical blow, partly because of their innocence, and partly because Emma had seen something in a few short hours that he was only beginning to acknowledge. Whatever had happened between him and Aurora in that storm-soaked night, whatever connection had sparked in a diner booth over pancakes and shared confessions, it felt too big and too fragile to name. "Sometimes it's more complicated than that, Em," he said gently. "But you do love her, right?" The question hung in the air between them, impossible to answer and impossible to ignore. Did he love Aurora? Could you love someone you'd known for 6 hours? Someone whose world was so different from yours that you might as well be from different planets? "I care about her," Liam said carefully. "Very much." Emma nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Then she'll come back," she repeated with unshakable faith. 3 days passed in a blur of routine and restlessness. Liam went to work at the construction site, came home, made dinner, read Emma stories, tucked her into bed, and tried not to think about Aurora's laugh or the way she'd looked when she successfully flipped her first pancake. He tried not to wonder what her life looked like now that she was back in her father's orbit, whether she was planning a wedding she didn't want, or sitting in meetings about a future that would never belong to her. He failed spectacularly at not thinking about any of it. Emma, meanwhile, had taken to leaving drawings under her pillow, pictures of 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with flowers in the yard. When Liam asked about them, she just smiled and said they were for when Aurora comes back. On Thursday evening, as Liam was washing dishes and Emma was coloring at the kitchen table, there was a soft knock at the door. Not the aggressive pounding of Aurora's father's security team, but something tentative, almost apologetic. Liam's heart stopped. He dried his hands slowly, as if moving too quickly might shatter whatever possibility was standing on the other side of that door. "Daddy?" Emma had looked up from her coloring book, crayon suspended in mid-air. "Is that Aurora?" "I don't know, baby," Liam said, though every cell in his body was screaming that it might be. He opened the door to find Aurora standing in the hallway, but she looked different. Gone was the rain-soaked desperation of their first meeting, replaced by something that looked like determination wrapped in designer clothes. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Liam made in a month, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon that spoke of stylists and careful planning. But her eyes held the same storm that had drawn him to her on the bridge. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." He managed his voice rough with relief and surprise and a dozen other emotions he couldn't name. "Aurora!" Emma's squeal of delight broke the spell, and suddenly she was launching herself at Aurora with the uninhibited joy of childhood. Aurora caught her, spinning her around once before setting her down, and Liam could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I told Daddy you'd come back," Emma said proudly. I told him people who love each other always come back. Aurora's gaze met Liam's over Emma's head, and the air between them crackled with everything they hadn't said, everything they hadn't had time to explore before the world intruded. "Can I come in?" Aurora asked. "Of course," Liam said, stepping aside. "Of course, come in." Aurora moved into the apartment with careful steps, as if she was afraid she might break something precious. She looked around at the space that had been her sanctuary for a few short hours, taking in the flowers that were beginning to wilt in their mason jar, the drawings Emma had made that morning, still scattered across the coffee table. "How did you—" Liam started, then stopped, not sure how to ask the question without sounding like he was interrogating her. "Get away," Aurora finished with a wry smile. "Very carefully, and probably not for very long." She sat down on the couch, and Emma immediately climbed up beside her, settling against Aurora's side like she belonged there. "Tell me," Liam said, taking the chair across from them. Aurora was quiet for a moment, her fingers absently stroking Emma's hair. "The last 3 days have been—" She paused, searching for words. "Educational. My father made it very clear what he expected from me. The wedding is in 6 weeks. Bradley is already planning our honeymoon to the Hamptons. My dress has been ordered, the venue booked, the guest list finalized. And you said yes to all of this?" Liam asked, though something in her expression told him the answer was more complicated than that. "I said what I needed to say to buy myself time," Aurora said quietly. "I played the part of the dutiful daughter, attended the meetings, smiled at the photographers, but the whole time I was thinking about pancakes." Emma giggled. "About our pancakes." "About our pancakes," Aurora confirmed, smiling down at her. "About how it felt to crack an egg and flip a pancake and sit at a table where no one was monitoring my every word or calculating the political implications of my breakfast choices." Liam felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "And what did you decide?" Aurora's eyes met his again, and this time there was no hesitation in them. "I decided that I want more pancakes," she said simply. "I want more mornings like Sunday. I want to learn how to grocery shop, and how to paint my own walls, and how to live in a world where the only person I have to be is myself." "Aurora," Liam said carefully, "you're talking about walking away from billions of dollars, from a life most people can only dream of." "I'm talking about walking away from a prison," Aurora corrected. "Money doesn't mean anything if you can't choose how to spend it. Beautiful houses don't matter if you're not allowed to make them into homes." Emma had been listening to this exchange with the intensity she usually reserved for her favorite cartoons. "Does this mean you're going to stay with us?" she asked hopefully. Aurora's expression softened. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's complicated." "Why?" Emma asked with the devastating simplicity of childhood. "Because," Aurora said, "your daddy and I barely know each other. Because my family will try to stop me. Because I've never lived in the real world before, and I might be terrible at it." "But you want to try?" Liam asked. "More than I've ever wanted anything," Aurora said without hesitation. Liam studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or second-guessing. What he saw instead was the same determination he'd witnessed on the bridge, but turned inside out. Instead of choosing to let go, she was choosing to hold on. "What's your plan?" he asked. Aurora laughed, a sound that held more nerves than humor. "I was hoping you might help me figure that out." "You could start by staying for dinner," Emma suggested helpfully. "Daddy's making spaghetti and I know how to set the table." Aurora looked at Liam, a question in her eyes. "Emma's right," he said. "You could start by staying for dinner." They fell into an easy rhythm in the kitchen, Aurora learning to brown garlic, while Emma narrated the proper sauce-to-pasta ratio, and Liam tried not to think about how natural this felt, how right it seemed to have Aurora moving through his space like she belonged there. "Can I ask you something?" Aurora said, as she stirred the sauce, concentrating on the task, with the same intensity she'd brought to cracking eggs. "Anything," Liam said. "That night on the bridge when you decided to stop and talk to me instead of just calling the police, what made you do that?" Liam considered the question while he drained the pasta, steam rising around him like a veil. "Honestly," he said, "you reminded me of myself. Those first few months after Sarah died, there were nights when I understood exactly why you were standing on that ledge." Aurora stopped stirring, her attention completely focused on him now. "But you didn't," she said. "You never—" "No," Liam confirmed. "Because of Emma, but also because Sarah made me promise something before she died." "What did she promise?" Emma asked, though she'd heard this story before. "She made me promise that I'd live," Liam said, looking at his daughter. "Not just survive, but really live. That I'd find joy again, even if it looked different than the joy we'd had together." Aurora's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And have you found joy again?" Liam looked at her standing in his kitchen sauce spoon, in hand a smudge of marinara on her cheek, and felt something warm and bright unfurl in his chest. "I'm starting to," he said quietly. They ate dinner at the small table, Emma chattering about her day at preschool, while Aurora listened with the kind of attention most adults reserved for much more important conversations. She asked questions about Emma's friends, about her favorite books, about the elaborate imaginary world Emma had constructed, involving a family of cats who lived in a castle made of blocks. "You're good with her," Liam observed when Emma excused herself to use the bathroom. "She's easy to be good with," Aurora said. "She's completely herself without apology or calculation. I'd forgotten that was possible." "It's one of the things I love most about kids," Liam said. "They haven't learned yet that being genuine is supposed to be dangerous." Aurora was quiet for a moment, twirling spaghetti around her fork with more concentration than the task required. "I want to learn that," she said finally. "How to be genuine without being afraid." "It takes practice," Liam said, "and it helps to have people around who make you feel safe enough to try." Their eyes met across the table, and Liam felt that same electric connection that had sparked between them in the diner 3 nights ago. But this time, there was no storm driving them together, no desperate circumstances forcing their hands. This was choice, pure and simple. Aurora was the first to look away, but not before Liam caught the flush that had crept up her neck. "I should probably go soon," she said reluctantly. "I told the driver to pick me up at 9, and if I'm late—" "What will happen?" Liam asked. "Questions I'm not ready to answer," Aurora said. "Not yet." Emma returned from the bathroom and immediately climbed into Aurora's lap, as if she sensed that their time together was limited. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Emma asked. Aurora looked at Liam, uncertainty flickering across her features. "I'd like to," she said. "If that's okay with your daddy." "More than okay," Liam said, and meant it. Aurora stayed until 8:30 helping Emma with a puzzle and listening to her read from her favorite picture book. When it was time for her to leave, Emma gave her one of her drawings, the one showing 3 stick figures in front of a flower-filled house. "So you don't forget us," Emma explained. Aurora knelt down to Emma's level, clutching the drawing like it was made of spun gold. "I could never forget you," she said seriously. "Not ever." Liam walked her to the door, hyper-aware of the small space between them, of the way Aurora's perfume mingled with the lingering scent of garlic and tomatoes. "Aurora," he said as she was about to leave, She turned back to him, one hand on the doorframe. "Whatever you decide," he said, "whatever you choose, make sure it's really your choice. Not mine, not Emma's, not even your rebellion against your father. Yours." Aurora smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached all the way to her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for reminding me that I get to choose." She leaned up and kissed his cheek, a soft brush of lips that left him standing in the doorway, long after she'd disappeared into the elevator, one hand pressed to the spot where her mouth had been. Aurora came back the next night and the night after that. Each evening she arrived a little earlier and stayed a little later, gradually shedding the armor of her other life like a snake molting its skin. She learned to cook simple meals and to braid Emma's hair into elaborate patterns that delighted them both. She brought art supplies and taught Emma to paint sunrises, their two heads bent together over sheets of paper, while they debated the exact shade of orange that captured the morning sky. Liam watched this transformation with wonder and growing love, seeing Aurora bloom into herself, like a flower finally given enough sunlight. She laughed more freely, moved more naturally, spoke without the careful calculation that had marked her first few visits. But he also noticed the shadows that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was looking, the way she checked her phone with increasing anxiety as 9 o'clock approached each evening. On the fourth night, as Aurora was getting ready to leave, Emma asked the question they'd all been thinking. "Why can't you just stay?" she said from her perch on the couch, surrounded by the detritus of another art project. "Why do you have to keep going back to the place that makes you so?" Aurora sat down beside her, careful not to disturb the painted flowers spread across the coffee table to dry. "Because sometimes we have to be brave in pieces," Aurora said gently. "I'm learning how to be myself here with you and your daddy, but I still have to figure out how to be myself out there in the rest of the world." "Are you scared?" Emma asked. "Terrified," Aurora admitted. "But you know what, I think that's okay. Your daddy taught me that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense, then climbed into Aurora's lap for what had become their nightly goodbye hug. "I love you, Aurora," Emma said, with the matter-of-fact delivery she used for all of life's most important truths. Aurora's breath caught, and she looked over Emma's head at Liam, with eyes that were bright with tears and something that might have been panic. "I love you too, sweetheart," Aurora whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It was the first time any of them had said the word love out loud, and it hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning an impossible distance. After Aurora left that night, Emma went to bed easily worn out from an evening of painting and storytelling. But Liam found himself unable to settle, pacing the small apartment, like a caged animal, Aurora's words echoing in his head. "Being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave." He thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made in sterile hospital rooms, and the ways he'd kept them and the ways he'd failed. He thought about the careful, controlled life he'd built since her death, safe, predictable, centered entirely around Emma's needs and his own survival. And he thought about Aurora, about the leap of faith she was contemplating, about the courage it took to walk away from everything you'd ever known in pursuit of something real. When Aurora arrived the next evening, Liam was waiting for her with dinner already prepared, and Emma freshly bathed and in her pajamas. "You're early," Aurora said, surprised. Usually she helped with the cooking and the bedtime routine. "I wanted to talk to you," Liam said. "After Emma goes to sleep." Something in his tone must have alerted her, because Aurora's expression shifted into something more guarded. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's fine," Liam assured her. I have something I need to say." They moved through the evening routine with a new tension humming between them. Aurora read Emma 2 stories instead of her usual one, as if she was trying to delay whatever conversation was waiting for them. Emma, with the uncanny intuition of children, seemed to sense the undercurrents and kept finding excuses to stay awake. Water bathroom, one more hug, a question about whether clouds had dreams. Finally, though, she succumbed to exhaustion, and Liam found himself sitting across from Aurora in his living room, the space between them feeling both too large and too small. "So," Aurora said, tucking her legs under herself on the couch, "what did you want to talk about?" Liam had rehearsed this conversation in his head a dozen times throughout the day, but now that the moment was here, all his careful words seemed to evaporate. "I've been thinking," he started, then stopped, frustrated with his own inability to articulate something that felt so important. "About," Aurora prompted gently. "About what you said last night. About being brave in pieces." Liam leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I think you're right, but I also think there comes a point where you have to put all the pieces together." Aurora was very still, watching him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "What are you saying, Liam?" "I'm saying that I'm in love with you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for a week. I know your world and mine don't make any kind of sense together. But I'm in love with you, and more importantly, Emma's in love with you, and I hope you might be in love with us too." Aurora's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like fear. "Liam, I'm not asking you to decide anything right now," he continued quickly. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your family or your inheritance or anything else. I'm just asking you to know that whatever you decide, you won't be doing it alone. If you want to walk away from your father's world, you have a place here. If you want to fight for your freedom, we'll fight beside you. If you want to disappear entirely and start over somewhere new, we'll pack our bags and disappear with you." Aurora was crying now, tears streaming down her face without any attempt to hide them. "You don't know what you're offering," she whispered. "You don't know what my father is capable of, what he'll do to anyone who helps me defy him." "Then tell me," Liam said simply. "Help me understand." Aurora was quiet for a long moment, gathering herself. When she spoke, her voice was steady but small. "3 years ago, I had a friend," she said. "Melissa Chen. She was my college roommate, the maid of honor at the wedding I was supposed to have but didn't. She was the only person who knew how miserable I was, how trapped I felt." Aurora paused, lost in memory. "She tried to help me. She found me a therapist who would see me off the books, helped me open a bank account my father didn't know about, even offered to let me stay with her family if I ever worked up the courage to leave." "What happened to her?" Liam asked, though something in Aurora's expression told him he didn't want to know the answer. "My father found out," Aurora said flatly. Within a week, Melissa lost her job at the nonprofit where she'd worked since graduation. Her younger brother was rejected from the college scholarship program my father's foundation sponsors. Her parents' small business lost 3 major contracts, all with companies that have financial ties to Whitmore Industries. Liam felt something cold settle in his stomach. "All because she tried to help you." "All because she tried to help me," Aurora confirmed. "And that was just for emotional support, for opening a bank account. Imagine what he'd do to someone who actually helped me disappear." The implications hit Liam like a physical blow. His construction company worked almost exclusively on projects funded by Whitmore-affiliated investors. Emma's preschool was in a building owned by a Whitmore subsidiary. Even the grocery store, where they'd bought pancake ingredients, was part of a chain that had financial ties to Aurora's father's empire. "I see," he said quietly. "Do you?" Aurora asked, leaning forward. Do you really? Because I don't think you understand the reach he has the power. He doesn't just destroy people financially, he destroys them completely. Their reputations, their relationships, their ability to rebuild anywhere else. Liam thought about Emma, about the life he'd worked so hard to build for her, about the stability that had taken him 18 months to achieve after Sarah's death. And then he thought about Aurora on that bridge, desperate and alone, and convinced that the only choice she had was to let go. Are you trying to talk me out of loving you? He asked. Aurora's laugh was broken, painful to hear. I'm trying to save you from making a mistake that could cost you everything. What if I don't want to be saved? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and consequence. Liam, Aurora said carefully, you have Emma to think about. You can't risk her future for what? Liam interrupted. For love, for the chance to show my daughter that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. Aurora stared at him, something shifting in her expression. You really mean it, she said, wonder creeping into her voice. You're really willing to risk everything. Not everything, Liam corrected. I'm willing to risk what I have for the chance to have something better. There's a difference. Aurora stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the street where her driver was undoubtedly waiting. I need time, she said without turning around. I need to think. Take all the time you need, Liam said. But Aurora, she turned to face him. Whatever you decide, decide it for yourself. Not because you're afraid of what your father might do, not because you want to protect me and Emma. Choose what you want and let us worry about the consequences. Aurora nodded, though he could see the struggle playing out across her features. I should go, she said reluctantly. Okay. She moved toward the door, then stopped, turning back to him one more time. Liam, she said softly. Yeah, I love you too, she whispered. Both of you. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. And then she was gone, leaving Liam alone with the echo of her words and the weight of everything that might happen next. He didn't see Aurora for 3 days. On Saturday, Emma kept asking when Aurora was coming over, and Liam found himself making increasingly vague excuses about Aurora being busy with family obligations. By Sunday, Emma had stopped asking, but she'd taken to carrying around the drawing Aurora had helped her make, the one with 3 stick figures holding hands like a talisman. Monday brought an unexpected visitor to the construction site where Liam worked. Marcus Webb, the project foreman, approached him during lunch break with an expression that was half sympathy, half nervousness. Carter, Marcus said, settling beside him on a stack of concrete blocks. We need to talk. Liam set down his sandwich, dread pooling in his stomach. What's wrong? Got a call from the investors this morning, Marcus said carefully. They're concerned about some of the personnel on this project. Personnel meaning me. Personnel meaning you. Marcus sighed, pulling off his hard hat and running a hand through his graying hair. They didn't give me specifics, just said they'd received some information about your personal associations that made them uncomfortable. Liam closed his eyes, understanding flooding through him. It had begun. How long do I have? He asked. End of the week, Marcus said reluctantly. I'm sorry, Liam. I fought for you, told them you're one of the best guys I've got, but money talks louder than recommendations. Something like that. Marcus stood up, his expression genuinely regretful. For what it's worth, I don't know what kind of trouble you've gotten yourself into, but I hope it's worth it. Liam thought about Aurora's laugh, about the way she looked when she was teaching Emma to paint, about the tears in her eyes when she'd said she loved them. Yeah, he said quietly. It is. That evening, Liam sat Emma down for a conversation he'd hoped never to have. "Baby," he said gently, "we might need to make some changes soon." Emma looked up from her coloring book crayon suspended in mid-air. "What kind of changes?" "Well, Daddy might need to find a new job, which might mean we have to move to a new apartment." Emma's face scrunched up in the expression she wore when she was trying to solve a particularly complex problem. "Is it because of Aurora?" she asked with devastating perceptiveness. Liam hesitated, torn between his commitment to honesty and his desire to protect her from complexities she was too young to understand. "Sort of," he said finally. "There are some people who don't want Daddy to be friends with Aurora." "Bad people. Not bad exactly," Liam said carefully. "But people who have different ideas about what's important than we do." Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all of life's injustices. "Are we still going to see Aurora?" she asked. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so." Emma nodded, accepting this uncertainty with the resilience that never failed to amaze him. "If we move," she said, "can we take Aurora with us?" Liam's heart broke a little at the question, at the simplicity of childhood logic that saw love as the solution to every problem. "We'll have to see," he said, pulling her into his lap for a hug that was as much for his comfort as hers. Tuesday brought another blow, a notice from Emma's preschool that they would not be renewing her enrollment for the following year due to budgetary constraints. Wednesday saw their landlord stopping by with news that the building had been sold and all tenants would need to find new accommodations within 60 days. The message was clear: Richard Whitmore's reach was long, his memory longer, and his commitment to protecting his daughter from unsuitable influences absolute. But Liam had made his choice, and he wasn't backing down. Thursday evening, as he was packing boxes and trying to figure out their next move, there was a soft knock at the door. His heart leaped with hope. But when he opened it, he found not Aurora, but a woman he'd never seen before. Elegant, expensive, with Aurora's eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. "Mr. Carter," she said in a voice like honey over broken glass. "My name is Victoria Whitmore. I believe you know my daughter." Liam felt the world tilt slightly on its axis as he stared at the woman standing in his doorway. Victoria Whitmore possessed the same striking beauty as her daughter, but where Aurora's features held warmth and vulnerability, her mother's face was carved from marble, beautiful, cold, and utterly unforgiving. She wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than most people's cars, and her blonde hair was swept into a chignon so perfect it looked like it had been sculpted rather than styled. "Mrs. Whitmore." Liam managed his voice surprisingly steady, given the way his heart was hammering against his ribs. "I wasn't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," Victoria said with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "May I come in? I think we have quite a lot to discuss." Liam glanced back toward the living room where Emma was sprawled on the floor, working on a puzzle, blissfully unaware that their world was about to shift again. The apartment looked different through Victoria Whitmore's eyes, smaller, shabbier, filled with the detritus of a life lived paycheck to paycheck. The contrast between her designer elegance and their humble surroundings felt almost violent. "Of course," he said, stepping aside. Because what else could he do? Refuse entry to one of the most powerful women in New York that would only make things worse for Aurora. Victoria stepped into the apartment with the careful grace of someone accustomed to being watched, her gaze sweeping across the space with clinical assessment. She took in the packed boxes, the drawings taped to the refrigerator, the wilted flowers still sitting in their mason jar on the kitchen table. "Daddy." Emma had looked up from her puzzle, her brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Who's the pretty lady?" Victoria's expression softened fractionally as she looked at Emma, and for just a moment Liam caught a glimpse of what she might have been like before money and power had carved all the humanity out of her. "This is Mrs. Whitmore," Liam said carefully. "She's Aurora's mother." Emma's face lit up with delight. "Are you here to see Aurora? She's not here right now, but Daddy says she might come back soon." "Actually, sweetheart," Victoria said, her voice gentler than it had been with Liam, "I'm here to talk to your daddy about something very important. Would you mind playing in your room for a few minutes?" Emma looked to Liam for confirmation, and he nodded reluctantly. "Take your puzzle with you, baby. We'll just be a little while." As Emma gathered her puzzle pieces and disappeared behind the curtain that separated her sleeping area from the rest of the apartment, Victoria settled herself on the couch with the kind of practiced elegance that spoke of a lifetime of sitting in expensive furniture. "You have a beautiful daughter," she said, and Liam was surprised to hear what sounded like genuine warmth in her voice. "Thank you," he said, remaining standing. "Though I'm guessing you didn't come here to discuss Emma." "No," Victoria agreed, her mask sliding back into place. "I came here to discuss Aurora, and you, and the rather unfortunate situation that's developed between the two of you." Liam took the chair across from her, the same spot he'd occupied during so many conversations with Aurora. "I'm listening." Victoria studied him with eyes that were ice blue where Aurora's were storm gray, and Liam had the uncomfortable feeling of being dissected by a surgeon. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect?" "A gold digger," Victoria said bluntly. "Some opportunistic nobody who saw my daughter's pain as a pathway to our family's fortune. Instead, I find a man who's apparently willing to sacrifice his career and his daughter's future for the sake of what love." The word dripped with disdain, but underneath it, Liam caught something else. Confusion, maybe, as if the concept of love as motivation was so foreign to Victoria Whitmore that she couldn't quite process it. "Love," Liam confirmed simply. Victoria laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Mr. Carter, you seem like a decent man, a good father, but you're playing a game where you don't understand the rules, and Aurora is the one who's going to pay the price for your ignorance." "What do you mean?" Victoria leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "Do you know where my daughter is right now, Mr. Carter?" Liam's stomach dropped. "No. She's in a private treatment facility in Connecticut, has been since Monday morning." Victoria's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she was discussing the weather. "My husband had her committed for what he's calling a nervous breakdown brought on by stress and poor judgment." The words hit Liam like physical blows. Aurora was locked away somewhere, probably drugged into compliance, and he'd been sitting here thinking she was taking time to make a decision. "That's illegal," he said, his voice tight with fury. "She's an adult. You can't just—" "Can't we?" Victoria interrupted. "Mr. Carter, my husband owns judges, senators, police commissioners. Aurora signed herself in voluntarily, or at least that's what the paperwork says, and she'll stay there until she agrees to fulfill her obligations to this family." Liam felt the room spinning around him. "Her obligations?" "Her wedding," Victoria clarified. "To Bradley Ashworth. Next month as planned. The invitations have already been sent." "She'll never agree to that." "Won't she?" Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "The facility Aurora is staying in specializes in what they call attitude adjustment therapy. Very effective for young people who've lost their way. I'm told that most patients become much more amenable to family guidance after a few weeks of treatment." The implication made Liam's skin crawl. They were going to break Aurora down until she agreed to marry a man she didn't love, and they were calling it therapy. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Victoria stood and walked to the window looking out at the street below. Because despite what my husband believes, I'm not entirely without maternal feeling. Aurora is my daughter, and I can see that this situation is causing her genuine distress. Then help her, Liam said urgently. You're her mother. I could what? Victoria turned back to him, and for the first time he saw something that might have been pain in her eyes. Destroy my marriage, lose everything I've worked 30 years to build. Turn my back on the family business that employs thousands of people. You could choose your daughter over your husband. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been since she arrived. Mr. Carter, you strike me as a man who's never had to choose between love and survival, between what you want and what you need to protect the people who depend on you. She gestured around the apartment. This is all very romantic, star-crossed lovers, noble sacrifices, love conquering all. But romance doesn't pay for little girls' school tuition, or medical bills, or the 1,000 other necessities of real life. So, you're just going to let him destroy her? I'm going to try to find a middle ground, Victoria said, which is why I'm here. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, thick and cream-colored, with the kind of weight that spoke of serious money. Inside this envelope, she said, is a cashier's check for $2 million. Tax-free, completely legal, with no strings attached, except one. Liam stared at the envelope like it was a poisonous snake. I'm listening. You take this money and disappear, Victoria said simply. You and your daughter, tonight. There's also contact information for a placement agency that can help you start over anywhere in the country. New identities, new social security numbers, complete family histories. You could be in Montana by morning or Florida or anywhere else you choose. And Aurora will recover from her illness, marry Bradley as planned, and settle into the life she was born for. In time, she'll realize that what she thought was love was simply a reaction to stress and poor judgment. Liam felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. $2 million. Enough to give Emma everything he'd ever dreamed of, the best school's college tuition, a house with a yard where she could grow up safe and secure, financial freedom that would let him be the kind of father Sarah had always wanted him to be. All he had to do was abandon the woman he loved to a life of captivity and forced marriage. $2 million, he said quietly. $2 million, Victoria confirmed. Plus relocation expenses and guaranteed employment in your new location. My husband has business interests everywhere, Mr. Carter. We can make sure you land on your feet. And if I refuse, Victoria's expression hardened again. Then by this time next week you'll be homeless and unemployed. Your daughter will be in state care, and Aurora will still be married to Bradley Ashworth. The only difference will be that you'll have accomplished nothing except making everyone suffer more than necessary. The envelope sat on the coffee table between them like a loaded gun. Liam stared at it, thinking about Emma's future, about the promise he'd made to Sarah to take care of their daughter, about the weight of responsibility that had shaped every decision he'd made since the day she died. Then he thought about Aurora on the bridge, broken and desperate, and convinced that death was her only choice. He thought about her laugh when Emma had gotten flour in her hair, about the tears in her eyes when she'd admitted she loved them, about the strength it had taken for her to climb down from that ledge and choose to live. Mrs. Whitmore, he said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you love your daughter? The question seemed to catch Victoria off guard. She was quiet for a long moment, her perfect composure slipping just slightly. Love is a luxury I've never been able to afford, she said finally. But I want what's best for Aurora. And you think marrying her off to a man she doesn't love is what's best for her? I think keeping her alive and safe is what's best for her, Victoria said sharply. Do you have any idea what Aurora was like before she met you? The depression, the anxiety, the nights when I'd find her standing on her balcony, staring down at the street like she was calculating the fall. Liam's heart clenched. He'd thought the bridge was the first time Aurora had contemplated suicide, but apparently her desperation ran much deeper than he'd realized. She was getting worse, Victoria continued. Every family event, every social obligation, every mention of marriage or her future, she would just disappear a little more. Bradley may not be her choice, but he's kind and stable and he'll take care of her. Sometimes that's enough. But it's not what she wants. What she wants will kill her, Victoria said flatly. I've seen it before, Mr. Carter. Young women from our world who try to reject their responsibilities, who think they can just walk away from everything and start over. They end up broken, used up, destroyed by people who see their naivety as weakness to exploit. Or they end up happy, Liam countered. Free, living lives that actually belong to them. Victoria's laugh was bitter. And how many of those happy endings have you personally witnessed, Mr. Carter? How many poor little rich girls have you seen successfully transition to normal life? The question hung in the air between them, and Liam realized that Victoria had a point. He didn't know anyone like Aurora, had never seen someone from her world try to make the kind of leap she was contemplating. His faith in their ability to make it work was based on hope and love, not experience. But then he thought about Aurora's face when she'd learned to crack an egg, about the joy she'd found in something as simple as setting a table with Emma. She'd been more alive in his tiny apartment than she'd ever seemed in the photos he'd seen of her at charity galas and society events. Maybe, he said slowly, the problem isn't that women like Aurora can't make it in the real world. Maybe the problem is that people like you never give them the chance to try. Victoria studied him with something that might have been respect. You really believe that, don't you? I really do. She was quiet for a moment, then reached for the envelope on the coffee table. Mr. Carter, she said, I'm going to make you a different offer. Liam waited, his heart hammering. Take the money, Victoria said. All of it. But instead of disappearing, use it to fight. I don't understand. Victoria stood and walked to the window again, her back to him. My husband is powerful, but he's not omnipotent. There are people in this city who owe him favors, but there are also people who owe me favors. People who've been waiting for the right opportunity to take Richard down a peg. Why would you help me fight your own husband? When Victoria turned back to him, her expression was different, softer, more vulnerable, more human. Because, she said quietly, I stood on a balcony once, too. When I was Aurora's age, engaged to a man I didn't love, trapped in a life that felt like a beautiful prison. And I chose differently than Aurora is choosing. You chose safety. I chose survival, Victoria corrected. And I've spent the last 30 years wondering what would have happened if someone had offered me another option. Liam felt something shift in the room, as if the air itself had changed. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we work together to give Aurora the choice I never had, Victoria said. The money in that envelope can buy legal representation, private investigators, enough leverage to get her out of that facility and into protective custody while we sort this mess out. And what do you get out of it? Victoria's smile was sad and beautiful and completely genuine. I get to find out if my daughter is strong enough to survive in the real world. And maybe if we're very lucky, I get to remember what it feels like to choose love over fear. Before Liam could respond, there was a sound from Emma's room, the curtain rustling as she peeked out to see if their conversation was finished. Daddy? she called softly. Can I come out now? Just a minute, baby. Liam called back, then looked at Victoria. I need to think about this. Of course, Victoria said. But Mr. Carter, don't think too long. Every day Aurora spends in that place, she gets a little more broken. And once they break her completely... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Victoria moved towards the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. There's something else you should know, she said without turning around. Aurora asked me to give you this. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and held it out to him. Liam took it with trembling fingers, recognizing Aurora's handwriting immediately. When did she give this to you? Sunday night, Victoria said, right before the ambulance took her away. The implication hit Liam like a sledgehammer. Aurora had known what was coming. She'd known her father would eventually make his move, and she'd prepared for it. Read it after I'm gone, Victoria said gently. And Mr. Carter, whatever you decide, decide quickly. Time is not our ally in this. After Victoria left, Liam stood in his empty living room holding Aurora's letter like it was made of spun glass. Emma had emerged from her room and was watching him with the solemn expression she wore when she knew something important was happening, but didn't understand what. Daddy, she said softly, are you okay? Liam looked down at his daughter, his brilliant, beautiful, intuitive daughter, who'd already lived through more loss than any child should have to bear, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. I'm okay, baby, he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Come here. Emma climbed onto his lap, settling against his chest, with the unconscious trust that children had for the adults who loved them. Liam held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, trying to ground himself in the solid reality of her presence. Daddy, Emma said after a moment, was that really Aurora's mommy? Yes, sweetheart. She seemed sad. Out of the mouths of babes, Emma had seen what Liam had almost missed, that underneath Victoria Whitmore's perfect facade was a woman carrying decades of her own regrets and compromises. Sometimes grown-ups have to make really hard choices, Liam said carefully. And sometimes those choices make them sad, even when they're trying to do the right thing. Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all of life's complex problems. Are you going to have to make a hard choice? She asked. The question was so perceptive, so exactly right, that Liam felt his breath catch. Maybe, he said honestly, but whatever I choose, it'll be because I love you, and I want what's best for you. And Aurora, Emma added matter-of-factly. You want what's best for Aurora, too. Yes, and Aurora. Emma was quiet for a moment, then looked up at him with eyes that were too wise for her age. Daddy? She said, what if what's best for me and what's best for Aurora are the same thing? The question hit Liam like lightning, illuminating something he hadn't quite been able to see before. Emma was right. What was best for Aurora, freedom, the chance to choose her own life, the opportunity to love and be loved without condition, was also what was best for Emma. Because what kind of father would he be if he taught his daughter that love was something you abandoned when it became inconvenient? What kind of man would he be if he chose money over the chance to fight for the woman he loved? You know what, baby? He said, hugging Emma tighter. I think you might be right. After Emma went to bed, Liam finally opened Aurora's letter. His hands were shaking as he unfolded the paper, and he had to read the first line 3 times before the words sank in. My darling Liam, if you're reading this, then my father has made his move, and I'm somewhere I can't reach you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for bringing this chaos into your life. Sorry for putting you and Emma at risk. Sorry for not being strong enough to fight this battle on my own. But I'm not sorry for loving you. I'm not sorry for those perfect evenings in your kitchen, for learning to flip pancakes and braid Emma's hair and feel like I belonged somewhere. I'm not sorry for discovering what it means to be seen and valued for who I am rather than what I represent. I know my mother will offer you money to disappear. Please don't be offended by this. It's how our family has always solved problems, and she genuinely believes she's protecting everyone by making the offer. But I also know you won't take it, because you're the kind of man who understands that some things can't be bought. What I hope, what I'm praying for as I write this, is that you'll fight for us. Not because you think you can save me, but because what we have is worth saving. I'm going to fight too, from wherever I end up in whatever way I can. But I need to know that when I get out, and I will get out, you'll still be there. I love you, Liam Carter. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the best in people even when they can't see it themselves. I love Emma's laugh and her drawings and the way she makes me believe that happiness is possible. Fight for us. Please. All my love, Aurora P.S. The bank account information at the bottom of this page is for an account I opened 3 months ago before Amwiusa. It contains every penny I could legally access without my father's knowledge, about $800,000. It's not much by my family's standards, but it might be enough to level the playing field. Use it wisely. Liam stared at the bank account information, his heart hammering. $800,000 plus the $2 million Victoria had offered, plus whatever legal and political connections Victoria could bring to bear. It wasn't enough to match Richard Whitmore's power directly, but it might be enough to punch through his defenses and create an opening. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to take care of Emma, about the careful, safe life he'd built since her death. Then he thought about Aurora locked away in some facility designed to break her spirit, counting on him to choose love over fear. There was really no choice at all. Liam walked to his laptop and began researching private investigators who specialized in family law cases. Then he started looking up lawyers who had experience going up against powerful families. By 3 a.m, he had a list of contacts and a plan that was probably crazy but might just work. He was going to fight Richard Whitmore for the right to love his daughter. And he was going to win. The next morning brought a flurry of phone calls and meetings. Liam took a personal day from work, what was left of his job anyway, and spent the day in offices that smelled like leather and ambition, talking to lawyers and investigators who listened to his story with the kind of professional interest that came with the promise of significant billable hours. By noon, he'd retained Margaret Chen, a family law attorney whose reputation for taking on wealthy, powerful clients was legendary, and hired a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate malfeasance. By 2 o'clock, they'd filed papers demanding Aurora's immediate release from the Connecticut facility based on unlawful commitment. By 4 o'clock, Richard Whitmore's lawyers had filed counter-motions claiming that Aurora was mentally unstable and a danger to herself. The war had begun. Margaret Chen was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from Liam in her downtown office surrounded by law books and case files, and listened to his story without interruption. "Mr. Carter," she said when he finished, "I'm going to be very direct with you. Richard Whitmore has more money and political influence than God. He can bury us in paperwork and legal challenges for years if he chooses to." "But," Liam prompted, hearing the implication in her tone, "but he's also made some enemies over the years. People who've been waiting for the right opportunity to take him down. Your case might just provide that opportunity." "What do you need from me?" Margaret smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Everything. Every conversation you've had with Aurora, every detail about her state of mind, every piece of evidence that she was coerced into that facility. And Mr. Carter, yes, we're going to make this very public very quickly. Richard Whitmore's power depends on his reputation for respectability. Once we start airing his family's dirty laundry in open court, he's going to be much more motivated to negotiate. That evening, as Liam was picking up Emma from her friend's house, one of the few places she was still welcome, since their landlord situation had become public knowledge, his phone rang. "Hello," he answered, not recognizing the number. "Mr. Carter." The voice was weak, shaky, but unmistakably Aurora's. Liam's heart stopped. "Aurora, how are you? Where are you calling from?" "I have maybe 2 minutes before they notice I'm gone," Aurora said rapidly. "I'm in a place called Serenity Springs in Connecticut. They've got me on medication that makes it hard to think clearly, but I've been pretending to take it for the last 2 days." "Are you okay? Are they hurting you?" "I'm okay," Aurora said, though her voice suggested otherwise. "But Liam, they're planning to move me somewhere else. Somewhere farther away where it'll be harder for anyone to find me. You have to—" The line went dead. Liam immediately called Margaret Chen, who listened to his report with professional calm. "This is good," she said. "It gives us evidence that Aurora is being held against her will and that she's coherent enough to seek help. I'll file an emergency motion first thing in the morning demanding immediate access to her." "What if they move her before then?" "Then we'll find her again," Margaret said firmly. "Mr. Carter, Richard Whitmore has made a critical mistake. He's underestimated both his daughter's strength and your commitment to her. That's going to cost him." That night, Liam lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Emma's steady breathing from across the room. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges, new ways that Richard Whitmore would try to break them down. But Aurora was fighting back. She was coherent, determined, and counting on him to hold his end of the battlefield. He thought about the 2 envelopes that now sat in his bedroom safe, Victoria's money and Aurora's bank information. Resources for a war he'd never asked to fight, but was fully committed to winning. Somewhere in Connecticut, the woman he loved was pretending to be broken while planning her escape. Somewhere in Manhattan, her father was probably planning new ways to destroy anyone who dared to defy him. And here in Brooklyn, in a small apartment that would soon no longer be his home, Liam Carter was falling asleep with a smile on his face. Because for the first time since this all began, he wasn't just reacting to Richard Whitmore's moves. He was making moves of his own. The real fight was just beginning. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 8 o'clock Friday morning in a courthouse that smelled of floor wax and broken dreams. Liam sat beside Margaret Chen in the gallery, watching as an army of lawyers in $1,000 suits filed in representing Richard Whitmore's interests. They moved with the confidence of people who'd never lost a case that mattered, their briefcases gleaming like weapons in the fluorescent light. "Impressive show of force," Margaret murmured, not looking particularly impressed. "Richard's trying to intimidate the judge before we even get started." Liam counted 12 attorneys on Whitmore's side compared to Margaret's team of 3. The math felt overwhelming, but then he remembered Aurora's voice on the phone, weak but determined, scared but fighting, and the numbers stopped mattering. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Patricia Hernandez entered the courtroom. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human drama imaginable. Liam had researched her background the night before, 20 years on the family court bench, known for her no-nonsense approach, and her intolerance for wealthy families who thought money could buy justice. "Your Honor," Margaret began when called upon, "we're here today because Aurora Whitmore, a 26-year-old woman with no history of mental illness, has been unlawfully committed to a private facility against her will by her father, who is attempting to coerce her into an unwanted marriage. The lead attorney for Whitmore Industries, a man named Harrison Kyle, who looked like he'd been carved from granite, stood smoothly. Your Honor, with respect to opposing counsel, Miss Whitmore voluntarily committed herself to Serenity Springs for treatment of severe depression and anxiety. Her father, Mr. Richard Whitmore, is simply ensuring she receives the care she needs. Margaret was ready with her counter-argument. Your Honor, we have evidence that Miss Whitmore was coerced into this commitment and is being held against her will. Furthermore, we have recorded testimony from Miss Whitmore herself obtained yesterday evening in which she explicitly states that she is being held unlawfully. Judge Hernandez looked interested. I'd like to hear this recording. Margaret nodded to her assistant, who pressed play on a small digital recorder. Aurora's voice filled the courtroom, thin and shaky, but unmistakably clear. My name is Aurora Whitmore. I am 26 years old, and I am being held at Serenity Springs Treatment Facility against my will. I was not mentally ill when I was brought here, and I am not mentally ill now. I am being medicated without my consent, and told that I will not be released until I agree to marry Bradley Ashworth. This is not voluntary treatment. This is imprisonment. The silence that followed was electric. Liam watched the Whitmore legal team exchange glances, their confidence wavering for the first time. Your Honor, Harrison Kyle said, recovering quickly. That recording could have been made at any time under any circumstances. It proves nothing about Miss Whitmore's current mental state or the circumstances of her commitment. Then I suggest we ask Miss Whitmore herself, Judge Hernandez said dryly. I'm ordering immediate transport of Aurora Whitmore to this courthouse for in-camera questioning. We'll reconvene at 2 o'clock this afternoon. As the courtroom cleared, Liam felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. In 6 hours, he would see Aurora again. But would she be the strong, vibrant woman he'd fallen in love with? Or would weeks of forced medication and psychological manipulation have broken something essential inside her? Margaret gathered her papers with efficient movements. This is good, she told Liam. Judge Hernandez is exactly the kind of judge we need, someone who won't be impressed by Richard Whitmore's reputation. What happens if Aurora seems broken when they bring her here? Margaret's expression was grim. Then we have a much harder fight ahead of us. But Mr. Carter, you need to trust that the woman you love is stronger than her father thinks she is. The hours until the afternoon session dragged like years. Liam tried to eat lunch but couldn't taste anything. He called Emma's babysitter 3 times to check on her, each time reassuring himself that his daughter was safe and happy, and unaware of the battle being fought for their future. At 1:30, he was back in the courthouse, sitting in the same pew-like bench, watching the legal teams reassemble. The Whitmore contingent had grown now. There were 15 lawyers plus several people in expensive suits who looked like they might be doctors or psychiatrists. At exactly 2 o'clock, Judge Hernandez returned to the bench. Bring in Miss Whitmore, she ordered. The side door opened, and Aurora walked into the courtroom, flanked by 2 bailiffs. Liam's heart nearly stopped. She was thinner than she'd been 3 weeks ago, her cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. Her hair hung limp around her shoulders, and she moved with the careful precision of someone fighting through medication. But her eyes were alert and focused, and when they found Liam in the gallery, they lit up with something that looked like hope. Miss Whitmore, Judge Hernandez said gently, please take a seat in the witness box. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them honestly. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Aurora said, her voice stronger than Liam had expected. First, do you know where you are? I'm in a courthouse. In Manhattan, I believe. Do you know why you're here? Aurora's gaze flicked to the crowd of lawyers representing her father, then back to the judge. Because I'm being held against my will at a treatment facility, and someone is trying to help me get out." "Who is trying to help you?" Aurora looked directly at Liam. "Liam Carter, the man I love." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Harrison Kyle was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, Miss Whitmore is clearly not competent to make decisions about her romantic attachments. She's known Mr. Carter for less than a month." "Mr. Kyle," Judge Hernandez said coldly, "Miss Whitmore is testifying about her current situation, not asking for my opinion on her love life. Please sit down." The judge turned back to Aurora. "Miss Whitmore, can you tell me how you came to be at Serenity Springs?" Aurora took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. 3 weeks ago, I told my father that I didn't want to marry Bradley Ashworth. I told him I was in love with someone else, and that I wanted to make my own choices about my life. 2 days later, I woke up in the back of an ambulance with an IV in my arm. When I asked what was happening, the paramedic told me I'd had a breakdown and was being taken for treatment. "Did you have a breakdown?" "No, Your Honor. I was drugged." When I arrived at Serenity Springs, I was told that I'd signed myself in voluntarily, but I have no memory of signing anything. I've been there for 3 weeks being given medication that makes it difficult to think clearly, and being told repeatedly that I won't be released until I agree to end my relationship with Liam and proceed with my engagement to Bradley Ashworth. Harrison Kyle stood again. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Miss Whitmore has a history of mental instability, including a recent suicide attempt." Aurora's eyes flashed with anger. "Your Honor, I was never suicidal. I was desperate to escape a life that felt like a prison, and one night I went to Brooklyn Bridge to think. I met Liam there by chance, and he helped me realize that I had other options besides the ones my father had given me." "Miss Whitmore," Judge Hernandez said, "in your opinion, do you need to be in a treatment facility?" "No, Your Honor. I need to be free to make my own choices about my life, my relationships, and my future." The judge turned to the lawyers. "I've heard enough. Miss Whitmore appears to be competent and aware of her circumstances. I'm ordering her immediate release from Serenity Springs into her own custody." Harrison Kyle was on his feet before she finished speaking. "Your Honor, we respectfully request that Miss Whitmore be released into the custody of her family, given her recent instability and poor judgment." "Request denied," Judge Hernandez said firmly. "Miss Whitmore is 26 years old and appears to be of sound mind. She doesn't need a guardian." Aurora's face was radiant with relief and joy. She looked at Liam, and he saw tears streaming down her cheeks. But Harrison Kyle wasn't finished. "Your Honor, if Miss Whitmore is released into her own custody, the Whitmore family will be forced to cut off all financial support, including her trust fund credit cards and access to family properties. She'll be completely destitute." Aurora's chin lifted defiantly. "I understand, Your Honor. I'd rather be poor and free than rich and trapped." Judge Hernandez smiled for the first time since the hearing began. "Miss Whitmore, you're free to go. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted into chaos. The Whitmore legal team huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. Court reporters packed up their equipment. And Liam pushed through the crowd toward Aurora, who was standing beside the witness box, looking dazed but victorious. "Aurora," he said, reaching for her hands. "Liam," she breathed. And then she was in his arms, and nothing else mattered. They held each other in the middle of the courthouse while lawyers and reporters swirled around them, and Liam felt like they were the only 2 people in the world. "I can't believe you did it," Aurora whispered against his chest. "I can't believe you fought for me." "I told you I would," Liam said, stroking her hair. "I promised you we'd figure it out together." Aurora pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with tears and something that looked like wonder. What happens now? Before Liam could answer, Margaret Chen's son appeared at his elbow. What happens now, she said with satisfaction, is that we get you both out of here before the press realizes what just happened. There's a car waiting outside. As they made their way through the courthouse corridors, Aurora's steps became increasingly unsteady. The adrenaline that had carried her through the hearing was wearing off, and the effects of whatever medication she'd been given were reasserting themselves. "I'm sorry," she said, leaning heavily on Liam's arm. I'm not quite myself yet." "How long before the drugs are out of your system?" Liam asked. "A few days," Aurora said. "Maybe a week. It's hard to think clearly, but it's getting better." Margaret's car was waiting at the courthouse steps, and as they climbed in, Liam caught sight of news vans already pulling up to the curb. Word was spreading fast. "Where are we going?" Aurora asked as the car pulled into traffic. "Somewhere safe," Liam said. "Somewhere your father can't reach you." Margaret turned around from the front seat. "Actually, we need to talk about that. Aurora, legally, you're free to go wherever you want. But practically speaking, your father still has enormous power and influence. He can make life very difficult for you and for Liam." "What do you mean?" Aurora asked. "I mean, he can't force you back into that facility, but he can make sure you can't get a job, can't rent an apartment, can't access any of the normal infrastructure of adult life. And he can continue to punish Liam for helping you." Aurora's face went pale. "He's already started, hasn't he?" "Liam, what's happened since I've been gone?" Liam hesitated, not wanting to add to her stress, but Margaret answered for him. "Mr. Carter has lost his job, his apartment, and his daughter's school placement, all thanks to pressure from Whitmore Industries." Aurora closed her eyes, her face crumpling with guilt. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen to you and Emma." "Hey," Liam said, taking her hand. "Look at me. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. But if you hadn't fallen in love with me, chosen to live instead of die. Aurora, you have nothing to apologize for." Margaret cleared her throat. "As touching as this is, we need to focus on practical matters. You're both going to need somewhere to stay while we figure out our next move. And Aurora, you're going to need time to recover from whatever they gave you at that facility." "I have an idea," Aurora said slowly. "My grandmother left me a house in Maine. It's been sitting empty for 2 years because my father refused to let me visit it. But it's mine completely separate from the family trust. We could go there." Liam looked at her in surprise. "You never mentioned a house in Maine." "I never mentioned a lot of things," Aurora said with a weak smile. "I wasn't sure any of it would matter if I couldn't get free." "Is it safe?" Margaret asked. "Can your father trace it to you?" "It's in a trust under my grandmother's maiden name," Aurora said. "He probably doesn't even remember it exists. And it's in a small town where nobody knows who I am." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That could work, at least temporarily. Give you both time to regroup and figure out what comes next." As the car made its way through Manhattan traffic, Aurora leaned against Liam's shoulder, exhaustion overtaking her adrenaline high. "Liam," she said softly. "What about Emma? Where is she?" "She's with Mrs. Rodriguez from down the hall," Liam said. "Safe and happy, and probably wondering why Daddy's been gone all day." "Does she know what's been happening?" "She knows I've been fighting for you," Liam said. "She knows you were in trouble and needed our help." Aurora was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she'll forgive me for turning your lives upside down?" Liam thought about Emma's drawings, about the way she'd included Aurora in every picture of their family since the night they'd made pancakes together. "Aurora," he said gently. Emma's been drawing pictures of our family for 3 weeks. And in every single one, there are 3 people, me, her, and you. She never stopped believing you'd come back. Aurora started crying then. Not the controlled tears of the courtroom, but deep wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she'd kept locked away for weeks. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I can't seem to stop." "Don't apologize," Liam said, holding her closer. "You've been through hell. You're allowed to cry." Margaret handed them tissues from the front seat. "Actually, this is probably good," she said matter-of-factly. "You've been holding it together for weeks. Better to get it out now." By the time they reached Margaret's office, Aurora had cried herself into exhaustion. She sat in the leather chair across from Margaret's desk, looking fragile but somehow cleaner, as if the tears had washed away some of the residue of her captivity. "Aurora," Margaret said gently, "I need to ask you some difficult questions about your time at Serenity Springs. What you tell me will help us build a case against your father for unlawful imprisonment." Aurora nodded, sitting up straighter. "Ask me anything." "Were you given medication without your consent?" "Yes. Multiple medications. They told me they were vitamins, but they made me feel sluggish and confused. When I refused to take them, they were administered through my IV while I slept." Margaret made notes on a legal pad. "Were you physically restrained?" "Not tied down, but I wasn't allowed to leave my room except for supervised activities. There were cameras everywhere and staff members followed me constantly." "Were you threatened?" Aurora hesitated. "Not directly, but Dr. Morrison, the head of the facility, made it clear that my stay would be indefinite unless I agreed to cooperate with my father's wishes. He said that young women with my condition sometimes needed years of treatment. Your condition being defiance of appropriate authority figures," Aurora said with bitter humor. "Apparently not wanting to marry the man your father chose for you is a mental illness that requires intensive therapy." Margaret's expression was grim. "Aurora, what you're describing is psychological torture. We're not just going to sue your father for unlawful imprisonment. We're going to destroy him." Over the next hour, Margaret walked Aurora through a detailed account of her 3 weeks at Serenity Springs. With each question, Aurora seemed to become stronger, more focused, as if telling her story was helping her reclaim pieces of herself that had been stolen. When they finished, Margaret leaned back in her chair with satisfaction. "Aurora, you've just given me enough ammunition to take down a small government. Your father has made a catastrophic error in judgment." "What do you mean?" Liam asked. "I mean Richard Whitmore has committed multiple felonies in his attempt to control his daughter. Kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, forced medication, any one of these charges could send him to prison. All of them together." Margaret smiled grimly. "He's going to be very motivated to negotiate." Aurora looked confused. "But he's my father. I don't want to send him to prison." "You don't have to," Margaret said. "But he doesn't know that. We're going to use the threat of criminal charges to force him to leave you alone permanently. You think it will work? I think Richard Whitmore has spent so long believing he's untouchable that he's forgotten other people have rights too. It's time to remind him." That evening, Liam and Aurora sat in his soon-to-be former apartment, surrounded by packed boxes and the detritus of a life that was about to change completely. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch between them, exhausted from the excitement of Aurora's return. "She missed you," Liam said softly, stroking Emma's hair. "I missed her too," Aurora said. "I missed both of you every single day." They talked quietly about practical things, the house in Maine, what they would need to take with them, how long they might need to stay hidden, while Margaret built their case. But underneath the logistics, there was something else, a fragile hope that maybe finally they could build something real together. "Liam," Aurora said eventually, "can I ask you something? Anything?" When I was in that place when everything felt hopeless, I kept thinking about the night we made pancakes. Do you remember how you said that sometimes we live for other people and that can be enough? I remember. "I think I understand what you meant now," Aurora said. "There were days when I wanted to give up, when it would have been easier to just agree to marry Bradley and go back to the life my father had planned for me. But then I'd think about you and Emma, about the life we could have together, and I'd find the strength to keep fighting." Liam reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Aurora, I need you to know something. I didn't fight for you because I thought you needed saving. I fought for you because what we have together is worth fighting for." Aurora's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different tears, tears of relief and joy and possibility. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you, and I love Emma, and I love the life we're going to build together. Even if it means giving up everything you've ever known." Aurora looked around the small apartment, at Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, at the wilted flowers still sitting in their mason jar, at the evidence of a life lived with love instead of money. "Especially then," she said. 3 days later, they were driving north toward Maine in a rented SUV loaded with everything they owned. Emma sat in the back seat, chattering excitedly about the ocean and whether they would see whales and what kind of seashells she might find on the beach. Aurora had improved dramatically over the past few days. The medication was finally working its way out of her system, and the woman Liam had fallen in love with was emerging from the fog of forced compliance. She laughed more freely, moved with growing confidence, and had even started sketching again simple drawings of the life they were moving toward. "Tell me about the house," Liam said, as they crossed into New Hampshire. Aurora consulted the GPS on her phone. "It's called Seaview Cottage, though it's actually much bigger than a cottage. My grandmother bought it in the 1960s as a place to escape from my grandfather when he got too controlling. She left it to me specifically because she knew what it was like to need somewhere to run." "Did you ever visit her there?" "Once when I was 12. It was the most wonderful week of my life. We painted seashells and built sandcastles and ate ice cream for breakfast. My grandmother told me that someday when I was old enough to understand, the house would be my sanctuary." Emma piped up from the back seat. "Will there be room for my art supplies?" "There will be room for everything," Aurora promised, turning to smile at her. "There's a whole room with windows facing the ocean that gets the most beautiful morning light. It would be perfect for painting." As they drove further north, leaving the city and its complications behind them, Liam felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, the sense that the future held possibility instead of just obligation. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Richards' lawyers called. "They want to negotiate. I think we've got him scared." Liam showed the message to Aurora, who read it with growing amazement. "It's really over," she said wonderingly. "He's actually going to leave us alone." "It looks that way." Aurora was quiet for a moment, staring out at the countryside rolling past the window. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said finally. "What? I'm not angry anymore. 3 weeks ago, I hated my father for trying to control my life. But now, I just feel sorry for him." "Why?" Aurora considered the question seriously. "Because he's spent so much time trying to own people that he's forgotten how to love them. He's going to die surrounded by money and power and people who are only there because they have to be. And we're going to live surrounded by love." From the back seat, Emma added her own commentary. "And we're going to live by the ocean. Daddy, do you think Aurora and I can teach you how to build really good sandcastles?" Liam caught Aurora's eye in the rearview mirror, and they both started laughing, deep, joyful laughter that seemed to fill the car with light. "Yeah, baby," Liam said, still laughing. "I think we can figure out how to build anything we want." As the sun began to set over the Maine coast, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that reminded Liam of Aurora's name, they crested a hill and saw the ocean spread out before them like a promise. "There," Aurora said, pointing to a weathered, shingled house perched on a bluff overlooking the water. "That's home." Home. The word felt different than it had that morning, loaded with new meaning and infinite possibility. They pulled into the gravel driveway as the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Emma was asleep in her car seat, worn out from the excitement of the day. Aurora sat quietly beside Liam, staring at the house that represented her freedom. "Are you ready?" Liam asked softly. Aurora turned to him, her face radiant with hope and love, and the kind of joy that came from choosing your own destiny. "I've been ready my whole life," she said, and as they carried their sleeping daughter toward the house where they would build their new life together. Liam thought about the night he'd found Aurora on Brooklyn Bridge, broken, desperate, convinced that death was her only choice. Now she was choosing life, choosing love, choosing a future that belonged entirely to them. Sometimes he thought the most beautiful transformations began with the darkest moments. Sometimes saving someone else was the same thing as saving yourself. And sometimes love really was enough to build a life on. The house smelled of salt air and old memories when they stepped inside, moonlight streaming through windows that hadn't been opened in 2 years. Aurora moved through the rooms like a woman rediscovering a half-remembered dream, her fingers trailing along dusty furniture and sun-faded curtains, while Liam carried sleeping Emma upstairs to what would become her new bedroom. The master bedroom overlooked the ocean, and as Liam settled Emma into the antique 4-poster bed that had probably belonged to Aurora's grandmother, he could hear the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks below. It was a sound of permanence of things that endured beyond the petty machinations of powerful men. "She looks peaceful," Aurora said softly from the doorway. Liam tucked the quilt around Emma's small form and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "She's been asking about the ocean for 3 days. Tomorrow she's going to think she's in paradise." They left Emma to sleep and made their way downstairs, where Aurora was already opening windows and letting the night air sweep away the staleness of abandonment. The house seemed to sigh around them, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for their arrival. "Your grandmother had good taste," Liam observed, taking in the comfortable furniture and walls lined with books and artwork. "She was an artist," Aurora said, lighting an oil lamp she'd found in the kitchen. "A painter, actually. That's where I got it from." She gestured toward a series of watercolors hanging in the living room, seascapes and sunrises that captured the changing moods of the Maine coast with breathtaking precision. "These are incredible," Liam said, studying the paintings more closely. She was really talented. She was also married to a man who thought art was a frivolous waste of time, Aurora said with familiar bitterness. She only got to paint when she came here away from his disapproval. Liam heard the parallel in her words, the echo of generations of women in her family who'd been forced to steal moments of authenticity from lives of obligation. "That's not going to be your story," he said firmly. Aurora turned to him, her face soft in the lamplight. "No," she agreed. "It's not." They spent the next hour exploring the house room by room, discovering treasures left behind by Aurora's grandmother, art supplies in perfect condition, a library filled with books on painting and poetry. Even a small studio space in what had once been a sunroom. Each discovery felt like a gift, as if the old woman had been preparing the house for exactly this moment. "Liam," Aurora said, as they stood in the studio surrounded by easels and canvases and bottles of paint that still gleamed with possibility. "I want to ask you something, but I'm afraid of your answer." "Ask me anyway." Aurora took a deep breath, gathering courage. "What if we stayed here, not just for a few weeks while things settle down, but really stayed? What if we made this our home?" Liam looked around the studio, imagining Aurora painting here while Emma played on the beach below, and what would he do? The question made him realize how much of his identity had been tied up in providing for others, in being responsible and practical and safe. "What would I do for work?" he asked, voicing his concerns. "There's a construction boom along this part of the coast," Aurora said eagerly. "Summer homes renovation projects. You could start your own company, be your own boss. And She paused, looking almost shy. "I could sell my paintings. Maybe not for much at first, but enough to contribute." The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Liam had spent so long focused on survival, on maintaining the careful stability he'd built after Sarah's death, that he'd forgotten how to dream about the future. "Emma would grow up by the ocean," he said slowly, testing the idea. "She'd have her own art studio," Aurora added, "and a yard where she could run and play without worrying about traffic or strangers. And we'd have time," Liam continued, the possibilities beginning to unfold in his mind. "Real time to be together, to figure out what kind of life we want to build." Aurora nodded, hope bright in her eyes. "What do you think?" Liam thought about the apartment in Brooklyn, with its thin walls and narrow windows, and the constant pressure of bills and deadlines. Then he thought about waking up every morning to the sound of waves and the sight of Aurora painting in the morning light, while Emma built sandcastles on the beach. "I think," he said carefully, "that it sounds like the kind of life Sarah would have wanted for Emma. For all of us." Aurora's smile was radiant. "Really? Really?" Liam pulled her into his arms, marveling at how right it felt to hold her in this place that would become their sanctuary. "But Aurora, you need to be sure. This isn't just about running away from your father. This is about choosing a completely different kind of life." "I know," Aurora said seriously, "and I've never been more sure of anything." They were interrupted by Margaret Chen's ringtone, echoing through the quiet house. Liam had forgotten he'd left his phone on, forgotten that there was still a world beyond these walls where battles were being fought and negotiations conducted. "Margaret," he answered, stepping out onto the wraparound porch where the reception was better. "Liam, I have news." Margaret's voice was triumphant. "Richard Whitmore just agreed to our terms." Liam felt his heart stop. "All of them. Every single one. He's dropping all claims on Aurora's mental competency, he's agreeing to stay away from her permanently, and he's releasing her trust fund, all of it no strings attached." What changed his mind? Margaret's laugh was sharp with satisfaction. Apparently, someone leaked Aurora's medical records from Serenity Springs to the New York Times. The story runs tomorrow morning, complete with details about the forced medication and psychological coercion. Richard's reputation is about to take a very public hit, and he knows it. Liam was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Who leaked the records? "That's the interesting part," Margaret said. "They came from someone inside the Whitmore organization, someone with access to Richard's private files." Aurora had followed him onto the porch, and Liam could see her face pale in the moonlight as she listened to his side of the conversation. "Margaret," Aurora said, loud enough for the lawyer to hear, "was it my mother?" There was a pause before Margaret answered. The records came with a note that said, "Some things are more important than family loyalty. Make of that what you will." After they hung up, Aurora and Liam stood on the porch in stunned silence, waves crashing below them and stars wheeling overhead in patterns that had remained unchanged for millennia. "It's over," Aurora said finally, her voice filled with wonder. "It's really over." "How do you feel?" Liam asked. Aurora considered the question seriously. "Free," she said eventually. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely free." They talked until dawn, making plans and sharing dreams, and slowly beginning to believe that the future stretching ahead of them was really theirs to shape. When the sun finally rose over the ocean, painting the sky in the soft colors that Aurora had been named for, they were still on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt Aurora had found in a closet. Emma's voice drifted down from upstairs, excited and wondering. "Daddy, Aurora, come look at the ocean." They found her standing at the bedroom window in her pajamas, her face pressed against the glass, as she stared out at the endless expanse of water that stretched to the horizon. "It's so big," she breathed. "I didn't know anything could be so big." Aurora knelt beside her, pointing toward the water. "Do you see how the waves keep coming and going? My grandmother used to tell me that each wave carries away something you don't need anymore and brings back something you do need." "What did the waves bring us?" Emma asked, with the serious curiosity of childhood. Aurora looked at Liam over Emma's head, her eyes bright with tears and love and possibility. "Each other," she said simply. The first few weeks at Seaview Cottage were a revelation. Emma took to coastal life like she'd been born for it, spending hours on the beach, collecting shells and building elaborate sand sculptures, while Aurora taught her to identify different types of seabirds. Liam found work almost immediately with a local contractor who was impressed by his skills and desperate for reliable help with the summer construction season. But more than the practical aspects of their new life, it was the emotional transformation that amazed him. Aurora bloomed like a flower, finally given enough sunlight, painting every morning while the light was good and laughing in ways he'd never heard before. Emma, who had always been a happy child, became positively radiant, her confidence growing as she explored her new world with Aurora as her guide and protector. And Liam himself discovered something he'd thought was lost forever: the ability to live in the moment instead of constantly planning for the next crisis. 6 weeks after their arrival, Aurora had her first art show at a small gallery in the nearest town. The paintings she'd created since moving to Maine captured the coast with a vibrancy and emotional depth that stunned everyone who saw them, including Liam. "These are incredible," he told her as they hung the last piece, a watercolor of Emma playing in the surf that seemed to glow with joy. "You're incredible." Aurora ducked her head, still getting used to praise that had nothing to do with her father's approval or social expectations. "They're just what I see," she said modestly. "No," Liam corrected, pulling her close. "They're what you feel. And what you feel is beautiful." The opening reception was packed with summer residents and locals alike, all drawn by word of mouth about the mysterious new artist who'd appeared in their midst. Aurora moved through the crowd with growing confidence, talking about her work with passion and authenticity that made people lean in to listen. "Sold?" the gallery owner announced, placing a red dot next to the painting of Emma on the beach. "And this one too." Another red dot appeared next to a seascape Aurora had painted during a storm. By the end of the evening, Aurora had sold 7 paintings and received commissions for 4 more. But more importantly, she'd connected with a community of artists and art lovers who valued her work for what it was, not for who her father was. "I can't believe it," she said, as they drove home under a sky full of stars. Emma had fallen asleep in the back seat, worn out from being the center of attention as Aurora's beautiful model. "Believe it," Liam said. "You're a real artist now, a working artist." "We're all working now," Aurora pointed out. "You with your construction projects, me with my paintings, Emma with her very important job of being the best beach explorer in Maine." Liam laughed, marveling at how natural it felt to talk about their life in terms of we and our and us. 3 months into their new life, Victoria Whitmore appeared on their doorstep. Liam opened the door to find her standing on the porch, looking smaller and more fragile than she had in his apartment all those months ago. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a sweater that probably still cost more than most people's car payments, but without the armor of designer suits and perfect hair. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully, "this is unexpected." "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," Victoria said. "I wanted to see how Aurora was doing, and to apologize." Aurora appeared behind Liam, having heard her mother's voice from the kitchen where she'd been preparing lunch. "Mother," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Hello, darling." Victoria's smile was tentative, uncertain. "You look radiant." It was true. Aurora glowed with health and happiness, her hair shining in the afternoon sun, and her skin golden from long days spent painting outdoors. "What do you want?" Aurora asked, though her tone wasn't unkind. Victoria gestured toward the ocean. "Could we walk? I have some things I need to say, and I'd prefer to say them privately." Aurora looked at Liam, who nodded encouragingly. Whatever Victoria had come to say, it was important enough to bring her to Maine. Aurora deserved to hear it. Mother and daughter walked along the beach while Liam stayed behind with Emma, who was napping in the hammock on the porch. He watched them from the window as they moved slowly along the water's edge, two figures who shared the same elegant bearing, but seemed to inhabit completely different worlds. They were gone for nearly 2 hours. When Aurora returned, her eyes were red from crying, but her expression was peaceful. "What did she say?" Liam asked gently. Aurora settled beside him on the porch swing, curling against his side like she belonged there. "She told me about the records," Aurora said, "about how she leaked them to the Times. Why did she do it? Because she realized that protecting the family name mattered less than protecting me," Aurora said. "And because she finally understood that what my father was doing wasn't love, it was ownership." Aurora was quiet for a moment, watching the waves roll onto the shore. "She also told me that she's leaving him," Aurora continued. "After 30 years of marriage, she's finally choosing herself over the family business." Liam felt a surge of surprise and admiration. "Where will she go?" "She asked if she could stay in town for a while," Aurora said. "Not here with us, but nearby. She wants to learn how to be a mother instead of a manager." "How do you feel about that?" Aurora considered the question seriously. "Hopeful," she said finally. "For the first time in my life, I think my mother and I might actually get to know each other." As autumn settled over the Maine coast, their life took on a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Liam's construction business was thriving with enough work lined up to keep him busy through the winter. Aurora's paintings were selling faster than she could create them, and she'd been invited to show her work in galleries in Portland and Boston. Emma started school in the local district, where she immediately made friends and charmed her teachers with her enthusiasm for learning and her elaborate stories about living by the ocean. But perhaps the most significant change was in the way they functioned as a family. The careful politeness that had marked their early days together had given way to the comfortable intimacy of people who'd chosen to build a life together. They argued sometimes about money, about Emma's bedtime, about whether Aurora's latest painting was finished or needed more work. But even their arguments felt different from the tense negotiations Liam remembered from his marriage to Sarah. These were the conflicts of people who trusted each other enough to disagree, who knew that love could survive disappointment and frustration. On a crisp October morning, as Aurora sat on the beach painting the sunrise while Emma built an elaborate sand city nearby, Liam made a decision that had been building in his heart for months. That evening, after Emma was in bed and Aurora was cleaning brushes in the kitchen sink, he pulled out the small velvet box he'd been carrying in his pocket for 3 weeks. "Aurora," he said, and something in his voice made her turn around. She saw the box in his hands, and her eyes went wide with surprise, and something that looked like joy. "Liam," she breathed. "I know we haven't talked about this," he said, dropping to one knee in the middle of their kitchen. "I know we've both been focused on building our new life and letting Emma adjust and making sure we're ready for this kind of commitment." Aurora's hands flew to her mouth, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "But I also know that I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person," Liam continued. "I love your strength and your courage and the way you paint the world like it's made of light. I love how you are with Emma, how you've become the mother she needed without ever trying to replace the one she lost. I love the life we've built together and the future we're still building." He opened the box, revealing a simple, solitaire diamond that caught the lamplight and threw it back in brilliant sparkles. "Aurora Whitmore," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Aurora was crying too hard to speak, but she nodded frantically, dropping to her knees beside him and throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, yes." The ring fit perfectly, sliding onto her finger, like it had been waiting for her all along. "How long have you been planning this?" Aurora asked, admiring the diamond through her tears. "Since the first time I watched you teach Emma to paint," Liam admitted. "Since I realized that what I felt for you wasn't just love, it was recognition. Like my soul recognized yours." Aurora kissed him, then soft and deep and full of promise, and Liam thought about the night he'd found her on Brooklyn Bridge, broken and desperate, and convinced that death was her only choice. Now she was choosing life, choosing love, choosing a future that belonged entirely to them. The wedding took place on the beach in front of Seaview Cottage on a bright day in late November, when the autumn light had the golden quality that made everything look like a painting. Aurora wore a simple white dress that moved like water in the ocean breeze, and Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, taking her responsibilities very seriously. Margaret Chen officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Victoria sat in the front row, elegant in navy blue, and looking more peaceful than Aurora had ever seen her. Even some of their new friends from town had come, drawn by the love story that had already become local legend. But as Liam looked out at the small gathering of people who'd chosen to celebrate with them, he realized that the most important witness to their vows was the ocean itself, vast, eternal, and unchanging in its rhythms of wave and tide. "Do you, Liam Carter?" Margaret said, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of the surf. "Take Aurora to be your wife, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Liam said, his eyes never leaving Aurora's face. "And do you, Aurora Whitmore, take Liam to be your husband, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Aurora said, her voice strong and clear. "Then, by the power vested in me by the internet," Margaret said with a grin, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Liam, you may kiss your bride." As Liam leaned in to kiss Aurora, sealing their union with the ocean, as their witness and the future spread out before them like an endless possibility. Emma cheered and threw flower petals into the air, where they were caught by the wind and carried out over the water. The reception was held in the cottage's living room, with Aurora's paintings providing the decorations and lobster rolls from the local diner serving as the feast. Emma gave a toast that consisted mostly of excited declarations about how Aurora was now officially her new mommy, which made everyone cry and laugh in equal measure. As the evening wound down and their guests began to drift away, Liam and Aurora found themselves alone on the porch, wrapped in the same quilt they'd shared on their first night in the house. "Mrs. Carter," Liam said, testing out the sound of her new name. "Mrs. Carter," Aurora repeated, smiling. "I like how that sounds." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the ocean and listening to the eternal rhythm of waves against the shore. "Liam," Aurora said eventually, "do you ever think about that night on the bridge?" "Every day," he admitted. "Do you think we would have found each other if I hadn't been standing on that ledge?" Liam considered the question seriously. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I think some people are meant to find each other whatever it takes. Maybe it would have been the bridge, maybe it would have been somewhere else. But I think we would have found each other eventually." Aurora nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Besides," Liam added with a smile, "Emma always says that families are people who choose to stay together. And we've been choosing each other every day since that night." "Every day," Aurora agreed. 1 year later, Aurora stood in the same spot on the beach where they'd been married, but this time she held a different kind of promise in her arms. Baby Sarah, named for the woman who'd given Liam the strength to save Aurora, and who would have loved her daughter-in-law with fierce protectiveness, was 3 months old and already showing signs of inheriting her mother's artistic eye and her father's steady temperament. Emma, now 6 and completely devoted to her baby sister, was teaching the infant the proper way to examine seashells, holding each one up to Sarah's curious gaze and explaining their various properties with the seriousness of a marine biology professor. "She's going to be an artist like Mommy," Emma declared with the confidence of someone who'd already figured out her sister's entire future. "Look how she stares at the colors in the shells." Aurora laughed, shifting baby Sarah to her hip so she could continue painting the morning light on the water. Her latest series, inspired by the changing seasons of their life by the ocean, had been selected for a major exhibition in New York, her first solo show in the city she'd once fled. "Are you nervous about the exhibition?" Liam asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around both his wife and youngest daughter. "A little," Aurora admitted, "but not about the paintings. They're good, and I know it. I'm nervous about going back to New York." "We don't have to go," Liam said immediately. "We can send the paintings and skip the opening." Aurora turned in his arms, baby Sarah gurgling contentedly between them. "No," she said firmly. "I want to go. I want to show the art world what Aurora Carter creates, not what Aurora Whitmore was expected to produce." Aurora Carter. Even after a year of marriage, Liam felt a thrill every time he heard her use his name, not because it meant she belonged to him, but because it meant she'd chosen to belong to them, to the family they'd built together. The New York exhibition opening was everything Aurora had hoped it would be, and more. The gallery was packed with collectors and critics, all drawn by the story of the heiress who'd walked away from billions to become a working artist. But more importantly, the paintings spoke for themselves, luminous seascapes and intimate family portraits that captured not just the visual beauty of their life in Maine, but the emotional truth of it. "Extraordinary work," a critic from Art Forum told Aurora during the opening reception. "You've managed to capture something that most artists spend their entire careers searching for." "What's that?" Aurora asked. "Joy," the critic said simply. "Pure, uncomplicated joy. Aurora looked across the gallery to where Liam stood holding baby Sarah, while Emma charmed a group of art collectors with her detailed explanations of which paintings were her favorites and why. Victoria stood nearby, elegant as ever, but relaxed in a way Aurora had never seen before. Since leaving Richard, Victoria had started her own small art gallery in Portland, focusing on emerging Maine artists who reminded her of the dreams she'd abandoned decades ago. "You're right," Aurora told the critic. "I have found joy." After the exhibition, they stayed in the city for 2 extra days, so Emma could visit the Museum of Natural History, and so Aurora could see some old friends who'd reached out after reading about her transformation in the art magazines. But by the 3rd day, they were all eager to get home to Maine, to the house by the ocean, where they'd learned how to be a family. As their plane descended toward Portland, Emma pressed her face to the window and pointed excitedly toward the coast. "There's our house," she announced, though they were still too high to see anything clearly. "There's our beach." Aurora smiled, following Emma's gaze toward the endless expanse of ocean that had become the backdrop for their new life. In 18 months, they'd gone from strangers brought together by crisis to a family bound by choice and strengthened by love. "Home," baby Sarah said, clearly her first real word. Aurora and Liam stared at their 3-month-old daughter in amazement. "Did she just—" Liam started. "She said, 'home,'" Aurora finished, tears springing to her eyes. Emma clapped her hands with delight. "She knows where she belongs." That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Aurora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A 1.5 years ago, she'd stood on Brooklyn Bridge, convinced that death was her only escape from a life that felt like a beautiful prison. Now she sat surrounded by the family she'd chosen and the art she'd created in a place where every day brought new possibilities. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked softly. "Bridges," Aurora said. "How something that was meant to be an ending became our beginning." Liam followed her gaze toward the ocean, where the evening light was creating a golden bridge across the water. "Maybe that's what love is," he said thoughtfully. "A bridge between who we were and who we're meant to become." Aurora leaned against his shoulder, baby Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms, while Emma dozed in the hammock nearby. "I like that," she said. "We're bridge builders now." As the stars came out over the Maine coast, painting the sky with ancient light, the Carter family sat together on their porch, surrounded by the sound of waves and the scent of salt air and the infinite possibility of tomorrow. They'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful transformations began with the darkest moments, that love really could be enough to build a life on, that choosing each other every day was the most radical act of all. And somewhere in the darkness, Brooklyn Bridge still spanned the East River, still carried thousands of people between the boroughs of their lives. But now when Aurora thought of that bridge, she didn't remember the desperation that had driven her there. She remembered the moment a stranger with kind eyes and a sleeping baby had chosen to stop to listen, to offer hope when hope seemed impossible. She remembered the first time someone had seen her as more than the sum of her family's expectations. She remembered learning that love, real love, wasn't about ownership or control or carefully negotiated arrangements. It was about choosing to build something beautiful together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, until you looked around and realized you'd created not just a life, but a home. The ocean rolled endlessly toward the shore, carrying away what they no longer needed, and bringing back what they'd always been searching for: each other, their dreams, and the unshakable knowledge that some bridges once crossed change you forever. In the distance, a lighthouse swept its beam across the dark water, guiding travelers safely home. just like love always had, just like love always would.